Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, we are going to be discussing the best decks to climb in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel ladder with the release of the Runic and Labyrinth cards from the newest set. Now, one thing I do want to note is that Spiral is not currently on this little list here because of reasons, but Spiral is absolutely insane, and I would solemnly put it into tier 1. It's a great deck with great recursion, and it takes a lot of skill to actually pilot. That's probably the biggest thing, but if you are able to pilot it, it will absolutely win you countless games. I would say if you're honestly not the greatest of pilot, like myself, then it's probably tier 1.5 to tier 2. It's not nearly as good, but if you are a great pilot, as a lot of other decks aren't that skill intensive, Spiral will be very good for you. So let's quickly discuss the changes to the meta. First and foremost, starting with Flunder being limited in heavy capacity. The limitation to the barrier statue means that a lot of games will not just be instantly won by Flunder, which means that they will actually have to utilize more powerful, or I should say their more powerful combos in order to deal with bigger boards. Being able to use multiple Risas, being able to play on the opponent's turn, being able to use things like Dimension Shifter and the like in order to allow them to actually win games. However, I still expect them to do very well just due to the nature of how they work. Sometimes M-Pen just straight up kills a lot of the Link decks, and I still expect them to have a good spot in the metagame. I don't expect them to go away, especially with Ishizu tier coming out, or I should say tier coming out relatively soon. I still expect them to be fairly decent. However, I think that people will have to actually learn how to play the deck, which will decrease its power level, and I think it will be not as playable. Tier 2, though, still a definitely playable deck. Yeah. Next up, we have Dinos. Dinos are still a great deck. They're still able to do a lot. They're able to OTK. They're able to make some pretty decent boards. They're not perfect, but I'd put them in tier 1.5. I think that there is a lot that they can do, but there's also a lot that they can't. If they don't see Miscellaneous Saurus, oftentimes a singular hand trap stops their combos dead in its tracks, and sometimes they also just brick on like babies and the big boy UCT. But if they are able to set up a UCT, yeah, good luck breaking that. Skytracker hasn't been good in a really long time. People that think that it's good are on some hot copium, and there's realistically no shot that this deck is more than Rogue. I'm going to put it in Rogue because it can still play DPE pretty effectively, but in all honesty, this deck is not good. Next up, we have ABC. ABC Dragon is coming off of the list, I think, entirely. No, it's being put to 2, which realistically should be enough, I think. Most people don't play 3 copies as far as I know. Maybe they do, but I think 2 copies should be enough. And even with that being said, without the Adventure Engine and without the Punktarion stuff, this deck's not going anywhere. Sorry, it's still in what this person who made the list so brilliantly put, X-Play Crossplay off. I love that. That's very funny. I'm going to quickly just put Cyber Dragons and Bee Troopers there. I'm not going to explain that one. Branded is the best deck, hands down, no questions asked. It now has Expulsion in order to give your opponent a monster that prevents them from special summoning, which is... yeah, this is like by far the best deck. Moving on, we have Adagnister. Adagnister is also like Rogue. If a deck can deal with the Link 6, you straight up lose. And if a deck can't deal with the Link 6, they probably went first anyway. So there's that. Sure, if you can go into the Link 6, great. But there are a lot of decks that can deal with that at this point, and you're honestly not ending on a whole lot more unless you're entirely uninterrupted, which isn't going to happen all that often. So yeah. Eldritch is one of the better decks. It's still really good, but I've seen that it is not being played nearly as much, but I do expect it to rise in popularity due to the fact that Flunder has fallen off. Flunder was the best deck for just kind of turning your brain off, playing the game, and winning, and now that is less so an option. You actually now have to think as a Flunder player. Eldritch is going to be that deck. I don't know if it is tier 1 or tier 1.5, but I'm going to put it at the top of tier 1.5. I think that it's a deck that will very easily allow you to climb if you just turn your brain off and win. Just flip floodgates, forehead. Next up, we have Shadal. Shadal is a control deck that I think a lot of people are sleeping on because of the fact that it can go second ever so brilliantly. Being able to go second is so very nice in the metagame because of the fact that no one can really prepare a board for a going second deck, and oftentimes if they win the coin flip and they choose to go first, you're probably even better situated than they are, unless they end on some crazy spiral board or something like that, and you happen to draw no hand traps, which does happen occasionally, but yeah, in all honesty, this is still a really strong deck. Also, Schism is a hell of a card, especially against things like Branded and the like. Being able to just stop your opponent from playing the game is pretty cool. Also, Winda. Next up, we have the Evil Twins. Evil Twins are fine. Being able to hand trap your opponent to death is a great option. I mean, Skytracker does this, but honestly, these decks basically do the same thing. Evil Twin is just ever so slightly better. Not by much, but slightly. However, don't play this deck. Don't play either of them. They're pretty bad. I'm going to put Fluffle into... Yeah, Fluffle's not really all that good. It can do a lot, but in all honesty, the actual plays that it makes most decks are prepared for. So there's that. Runic is the first of the new decks that have come out, or that will come out in the next couple of days from when you're seeing this. And I don't expect it to do all that well. It's basically another Floodgate type deck, however, utilizing the powerful effects of the Runic cards, and specifically Runic Fountain, in order to recycle its resources. However, it doesn't really have anything good to do, unless you're sitting under Floodgates, which a lot of them have actually been nerfed in this game, and there are a lot of options for anti-Floodgate techs, such as the Red Reboot, Pangratops, and the like. There are just a myriad of options with dealing with this deck, so I don't expect it to do all that well. However, when the Splight stuff comes out, I expect this deck to be probably the best one out of the options. But until then, it'll be Rogue, maybe. I still expect it to be able to take games due to that milling effect, because banishing cards is way better than sending them to the graveyard, so it's still decent. Labyrinth, on the other hand, is also probably just in Rogue. I don't expect it to do too well. Maybe up in tier 2 at the best, but honestly, I expect Runic to do better. Trap decks are in a point in the game where if you are not floodgating your opponent out of the duel, you are probably not winning. And the reason for that is pretty simple. You just don't have enough to deal with your opponent's stuff. There are so many ways to extend in this game nowadays that it is very difficult to utilize even set 5 and pass, and if one of those isn't a floodgate, you're not really doing much. And Labyrinth really heavily synergizes with normal traps, which normal traps aren't floodgates. Continuous traps are. So I don't expect them to do all that well. Marincess is Live Twin. That's it. It's the same deck. It's like legitimately the exact same. Heroes. I don't know. Heroes died like one hand trap. Next we have Drytron. Drytron is a deck that I don't expect to see all that often because of its inconsistency, but is still able to put up some really, really strong boards. Overall, I do expect it to do well with climbing, but the fact that it is more inconsistent, you're not able to see Ben 10 more often in order to like get your plays started, and like more people are playing more hand traps, which really specifically deals with this in particular, as well as more people are just ready to have outs to a disco ball. I don't expect this to be everywhere or even do all that good, but it's still decent. Orcus got a buff for some reason. I guess Konami just really wants us to go back to toss format for... I wish I could tell you. With Engage at 2, Galatea now at 2, and Salamangreat, Gazelle at 2, and Quick Fix at 2, they really just said, let's just give them all the stuff. So Galatea at 2 is honestly one of the biggest buffs that we have had in, like, Master Duel ever. That's an insane buff to Orcus. Now they can have their combos activate multiple times. They can go through Dingirsu more easily. They can go and actually deal with opponents' monsters with that Ding, and then go into Galatea to get their plays started again, or to get the the spells and traps into rotation even more easily. Just overall, it's a very positive interaction. I wouldn't really say that it's above tier 2 though, but it's still pretty good. Plunder is a deck that exists, and honestly is one similar to Spiral, where realistically you do have to be a better pilot at the deck for you to see success. If you're not a good pilot, it's probably Rogue tier. If you are a good pilot, it's probably tier 2. Unlike Spiral, it doesn't have nearly as high of a ceiling, but it is still able to do quite a lot. And if your opponent doesn't know how to play against the deck, which basically every opponent doesn't, you will probably have easier success and an easier time, unless your opponent is playing VW for some unknown reason, and then you just cry and wish that they were playing something else. Next up, we have Prank Kids. Prank Kids are honestly not dead. They're probably still one of the best decks, even with the limitations to DPE and Adventure and the actual Prank Kid engine itself. You're still able to end on a Battle Butler, which is very good, and oftentimes what ended up winning games due to the powerful effect of the Battle Butler, and you're still able to do that with hand traps and the Adventure engine and stuff like that. The Adventure engine isn't dead, people just stopped playing it. This deck is still pretty good. I wouldn't say it's in the top echelon of decks anymore, but it's still very good. So be on the lookout for this, and hey, if you built the deck and you just stopped playing it, you still can. It's still a very strong deck. Predaplant exists. Dragonlink is probably one of the best decks situated in the current format, and no one is playing it still. Why? Because it's pretty difficult to play, and the combos are long, and the timer got shortened. Yes, the timer is an issue with this deck in particular. It does take a lot of time to actually go through the combos, which is probably the biggest downside when it comes to this deck. Honestly, I wish that I was kidding. But still very strong. It makes some very powerful end boards, and Boral End Dragon is absolutely insane. If you're able to end on that, oftentimes that is enough. Salamangreat is also going to be put into tier 1.5. Salamangreat Gazelle being put to 2 on the list allows for it to play Heat Soul Control very well, while still being able to go through the Salamangreat plays very easily, and ending on just overall some very powerful things. Now granted, the metagame will eventually push this out of the meta, because it's not really that strong if you're not able to interrupt your opponent, which right now hand traps are pretty good. They're really good overall, except for against like this deck, and that's about it. Like every other deck loses to hand traps. So all in all, I do think that this deck will be situated pretty well. Scareclaw is a deck that exists, and honestly, if this is just Scareclaw, it's pretty bad. Most people have an out to an unaffected 3,000 attack point monster, even if they are going to put your cards into defense position, because access code exists. It's not negating it like Baguska. Now granted, sometimes they do end on Baguska, but honestly, I have seen that like once, where they've ended on Bagusa, and that was because they had some crazy plays due to this deck in particular. Tribrate is still one of the best decks, if not the best deck of the current format. Well, okay, it's up there with Branded. And the main reason that Tribrate in particular is the better deck, or is one of the better decks, is because of the fact that it can be played with Zodiac, Lyrilisk, or Scareclaw, a new addition to this, or Pure. There are so many different variants that you could play, so many different styles that you could personally play, that you could climb with, that really make it very malleable. You can play basically whatever you want, however you want, and it will probably work. Tribrigade is absolutely insane and has seen very little hits. Fractal to 2 as well as Tenki to 2 are basically slaps on the wrist to that whole archetype. You still can play Zeus, you can still play the Zodiac stuff, you can still play the Lyrisk stuff, you can still play the Scareclaw stuff, which is pretty new, and you can end on some pretty crazy boards. I've seen some really cool, interesting combos utilizing things like Griffin, going into Baguska, going into a myriad of other cards as well, to end on some really interesting and difficult to break boards, but not like negation boards, as much as it is just like interactions, which is really cool. I really like it. I'm actually going to put them above Dragonlink here. Next up, we have Sharks. Sharks are cool. Sometimes your opponent just doesn't have an out to this card. I genuinely don't have anything else to say. Sometimes Stealth Kragan just wins you the game because your opponent can't out a UDF. Or what have you. I don't know. Yeah. Plants. I really haven't seen them do anything, and until we get some more better support, I don't expect them to do anything. I don't think we're getting Rika Princess. If we are getting Rika Princess, then this is absolutely entirely incorrect, and I would put them in like tier 1. I'd put them in like tier 2, unless you're like a godlike pilot and YCS levels of skill. But yeah, right now I don't think I saw Rika Princess, so I don't expect this deck to do all that well. Sword Soul is a tier 1 deck. Sword Soul is still everywhere. You can play it going second. You can play it going first. You can play it going second, which is absolutely broken. You can play it going second, which is absolutely broken. Sorry, I had to repeat myself because it's absolutely crazy that you can play this deck going second and still have even better success than you would previously. Vishada is a card. That's all. I don't know. Vishada is just crazy. So there's that. Phantom Knights are still absolutely everywhere, or not everywhere. Absolutely powerful. Sure, there have been some limitations here and there. Like, for example, you can no longer go for the Rongo line, but let's be honest, that was actually pretty bricky and honestly not really worth it for most of the Phantom Knights players. But more important than anything is the fact that you were able to still play DPE and Adventure. If you go into Cherubini, you're able to dump the Water Enchantress. Water Enchantress can then get you the Adventure engine, and you can do this in 4 summons. You can get that Omni Negate up before the... in 5 summons, before the Nibiru is activatable. So on that 5th summon, you are able to activate your effect in order to negate the Nibiru, which is Pog. You love to see it. Also, on top of that, you are able to go into the DPE through Verte. So you can still end on the same boards. It's a little bit more inconsistent. Yeah, a little bit more inconsistent, but it's still a really strong deck, and it hasn't really been power crept out of the meta. I'd put it above the Dinos, but definitely below Eldritch. I hate this deck, but it is probably one of the best decks. Being able to slap down an Umi and then slap down the Kairyu-Shin and watch your opponent deal with their own board is dumb. It's really dumb. It is the blight on dueling, or on Master Duel, that I truly despise. It is worse than anything that Flunder has ever done. It is worse than anything that Branded will ever do, and it is worse than Tyr and its entire existence. This deck sucks, and it's really good for climbing. If you just want to climb, turn your brain off, this is the new deck to play. Honestly, I hate it, I despise it, it deserves to burn in a fire, but yet it's made of water. How can one do that? Next up, we have Unchained. Unchained is honestly probably very slept on. There is a lot that this deck can do in particular, just due to the fact that a lot of people aren't able to read, and that's like it. This deck gets so much better if your opponent reads the cards and actually just doesn't interact with you like half the time, and you just kind of stare at them, and they just kind of stare at you, and then you don't really do anything, or like they go second. But all in all, you can also just board break with things like Evenly Matched, and then like set a couple of cards and then you're off to the races, and it's pretty good. So honestly, Unchained is still pretty good. Ancient Warriors is terrible. I'm sorry to break your heart. Ancient Warriors can't even go second correctly. It just doesn't work half the time. I don't know why people play this deck. It bricks. It's slow. It's not a good OTK deck. It requires too many names. It requires too many Ancient Warrior cards. You can't play enough things to actually break boards, so it just kind of doesn't function. Virtual World is still a deck that I believe is slept on. You can still end on some pretty interesting boards. Shenzhen is an absolute godsend against a lot of the metagame, especially things like the Branded, Tribrate, and Sword Soul archetypes. Actually, literally all of these absolutely get demolished by Shenzhen by itself. Maybe not demolished, but like, they're pretty hard to out Shenzhen. It's pretty difficult to out Shenzhen with any of these. Also Eldritch, also Phantom Knights, also Salamangreat, like Orchist. Yeah, Shenzhen by itself is like really good. There's that. And then we have, of course, Zombie World, which I'm going to put right next to Eldritch, just because they basically go hand in hand. This is just a different variant of Floodgate, and actually, I'm going to put this lower. I'm going to put it in tier 2. I still think it's very good, but with the reduction in the amount of Flunder players I expect to see, I do expect this deck in particular to see significantly less play. Flunder will not, I mean, it will still lose to it, but like, we're going to be seeing less of that, and that's not a free win anymore. So with that, you're not going to climb it nearly as effectively with that deck. So overall, this is the ban list. As I said, Spiral's up here if you're a good pilot, down here if you're not. So keep that in mind. Yeah. Honestly, this is a pretty terrible metagame overall. So many cards and so many decks just have automatic win buttons. Even the decks clear down here in the crossplay off section of the list have just automatic win buttons. Hero, in particular, can go into something like DPE and Plasma, and basically sit under a one-sided skill drain, while also preventing you from just like attacking over their monsters, which is a very fun, cool, and interactive game plan. But so many of these decks have outs like that, or have combos like that, where you basically just don't get to play the game, besides like a very select few, like for example, Skytracker, Unchained. Nope, that's it. That's like all I can think of. Maybe Labyrinth when they come, but maybe not, who knows? So, yeah. I don't expect any of these decks to really stand out and have a insane win rate, just because basically all of these can lose to random coin flips of matchups, right? What is a branded deck going to do against Kairio Shin? Not a whole lot. So that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, a like is very much so appreciated. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh!, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.